time now for our chief guest, Dr. Ashok Dalwai, and I feel extremely honored to introduce him before you. He is a renowned bureaucrat, an ardent reader, and an encyclopedia of knowledge. It is such a privilege to have him as the chief guest today. Dr. Dalwai, as a member of Indian Administrative Service of the 1984 batch, served the Odisha cadre. He has joined in different capacities at both field and policy formulation stages in the states of Odisha and Karnataka, and also the government of India. His grassroots level experience from serving in different backward and tribal pockets of Odisha, besides as district collector of Kalahandi in Odisha and Raichur in Karnataka, and in urban management as commissioner of Bangalore City Corporation, bring him close understanding of people's issues in both rural and urban settings. At the senior level, he has served as secretary and principal secretary in the departments of industries, steel, mines, and textiles, besides holding various tenures as chairman and managing director of public sector undertakings, research, and academic institutions. He has been serving government of India since 2010. He is one of the initial members of UIDAI team that rolled out biometric-based resident enrollment for Aadhaar. As head of the Technology Center of UIDAI, his role in building a robust technology platform has been well appreciated. Since 2015, he has been with the Ministry of Agriculture of Government of India. He is presently serving as Chief Executive Officer, National Rainfed Area Authority in the rank of Secretary. He has recently also been appointed as the Chairman of Commodity Derivatives Advisory Committee by the Securities Exchange Board of India. He has always focused on effective delivery of services and on good governance. Some of the important contributions include the first agriculture policy of the state of Odisha, first textile policy of Karnataka, self-assessment scheme for assessment of property tax in the city of Bangalore, which was subsequently adopted across the country, launch of Swachh Bangalore, a new initiative in solid waste management, participatory irrigation management, so on and so forth. For Government of India, he has drafted the Model Agriculture Produce and Livestock Marketing Promotion and Facilitation Act 2017, Model Contract Farming and Services Act, and guidelines for Grameen rural agricultural markets, GRAMs, etc. He's also leading the initiatives on transforming India's pulse, oilseed, and millet segment. More importantly, as chairman of the Interministerial Committee on Doubling Farmers' Income, he has submitted a 14-volume strategy with specific recommendations to government, which effects a paradigm shift in agriculture by treating it as an enterprise and emphasizes on income security and welfare of the farmers. He has now been tasked to oversee the implementation of the recommended strategies in his capacity as the chairman of the empowered body. He's a student of agriculture science, a postgraduate in agriculture economics, and PhD in economics. He has always sustained his interest in academics and research and has published several research papers and written journal articles. He is a lifetime member of Indian Society of Agriculture Economics and Indian Society of Agricultural Marketing and has lectured at several national and international fora. His services are well recognized. Some of the important appreciations that he has garnered include one of the top 10 important persons in the state of Karnataka in Times of India Survey 2002, as distinguished alumnus by UAS Bangalore in 2013, and has been conferred the honorary doctorate by the University of Agricultural Sciences, Dharwad in 2016 for his services to the society in general and agriculture in particular. He's also been conferred with Exemplary Thought Leadership Award by ICE Danforth 2018 and KKE Memorial Oration by ICAR and DRI for commendable contributions to Indian society and agriculture. Also, honorary fellowship by Confederation of Horticultural Association of India and Policy Leadership Award by Indian Council of Food and Agriculture. Such an honor and privilege to introduce you, sir, and I invite you for your keynote address.
Thank you, Dr. Tambra, for your kind words. Respected Dr. R.V. Vyas, the Vice Chancellor of Anand Agriculture University, Dr. R.C. Agarwal, respected DDG Education and National Director of the NAHEP, Dr. Prabhat Kumar, National Director NAHEP CAST, Dr. Y.C. Zala, Principal and Dean of the Business Management Institute at the University, the conveners, Dr. R.S. Pundir, Dr. Ritambara Singh, all the co-speakers for the next 2 days, all the staff and student members of the Anand Agricultural University, all the dear participants who have joined these 2 days, to all of you. And first of all, let me thank the respected Vice Chancellor of the Agriculture University for having invited me to be with you for the second time. I was at Anand only in Feb of 2020. So it's a privilege once again to be with you at this juncture. And I must say that the topics chosen for these 2 days webinar are extremely contemporary and relevant for the transformation of agriculture that we are all looking at. It's a very broad topic. It includes commodity markets and farmer producers organizations. Both need to be dealt independently, and simultaneously both are organically linked. So in that context, having brought the two topics together is a good thing that you as organizers have done it. Now, I won't get into the nitty-gritties of these two topics. I would confine myself to share with all of you the contextual and the conceptual underpinnings of these two themes, and let you then go with the other speakers to understand the details. And at the end of the 2 days of webinar, you would be coming up with your own thoughts and a lot of critique and questions, so that we can start working on operationalizing in a more efficient manner the commodity markets of our country and the new initiative of farmer producers organizations. Now, before I go further, I would like all of you to go back to the father of economics, Adam Smith. He, in the 18th century, laid the first principles of economics. And he was very clear that when we talk of economics, we need to talk about the happiness of the people. And there cannot be business without morality. So the two important books that he brought out were Wealth of Nations, and the second one was The Morality of Sentiments. Now, the commodity markets and the farmer producers organizations, in a way, are trying to reconcile the profit motive of the commodity markets with the moral principles that the democratic institutions of FPOs aim at. When Adam Smith spoke about the happiness of people and therefore the happiness of nations in his Wealth of Nations book, what he was advocating was a free market, a free trade. And he believed very strongly that when we allow hassle-free, seamless transactional trade within and between the countries across the continents, we would be helping the people to create wealth. The purpose of starting with this preamble is to tell you that in India, where agriculture is a dominant economic activity, and agriculture influences the livelihood opportunities of a large section of the society, the importance of agriculture cannot be therefore gainsaid. How do we build agriculture production system in such a manner that we are able to transfer incomes to the farmers and everybody else who is associated with it? And we all agree today that if we would like to do that in the modern world, agriculture production system has to be converted into agriculture business. And when we talk of agriculture business, naturally it would include end-to-end We're not going to compartmentalize agriculture in terms of pre-production, production, and post-production, but we look at all these things in an integrated, organic manner. Now, let's look at what has happened to agriculture in our country. Having suffered a great setback in the 1960s, where we had to depend upon other countries for our own food security, we introduced Green Revolution, and that has made a great success. What has happened over the last 70 years is very stupendous agricultural growth combined with diversification of agriculture production system. Today, India produces nearly 1.2 billion tons of agriculture produce, and it is highly diversified across the segments that constitute agriculture. And when we now talk about agriculture business, naturally, one of the important ingredients is the way our post-production responds to the production that happens. Generally, it is believed that, and it is true by facts too, that we have been focusing too much on food grain. But then, if we would like to transfer incomes to the farmers, then naturally, the post-production response, including the marketing response, has to be differentiated. It has to be differentiated because each of the segments of agriculture and each of the sub-segments within these segments have different nature, primarily in terms of perishability and non-perishability. Now, almost 70% of agriculture GDP today in India comes from horticulture, livestock, dairy, and fishery. It only goes to show that not just the food grains, which contribute about 30%, but the other segments deserve equal attention. Now, when we want to do this thing, we must know that we need to make proper investments and develop management practices in terms of post-production, including connectivity to the markets. What we generally see is that in case of non-perishables like cereals and pulses and oil seeds, there is local pickup by the markets for consumption as well as by millers. And since they have a long shelf life, it is also possible for them to be stored and sold at a later date. Unfortunately, in case of perishables like fruits, vegetables, milk, meat, fish, etc., where the holding life is very small, we find problems and then most of it goes waste. So now this brings us to the issue of food loss and waste, or what is in short called as FLW. This is very important from the perspective of converting the produce into money, and that is called monetization. And monetization determines the incomes of the farmers. So let's therefore look at what is the issue of food loss and waste in our country. Now, Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that at the global level, the food loss and waste registered as high as 1.2 billion tons. That means it is equivalent to the total produce of agriculture in our country. And now when we waste 1.2 billion tons, it happens in two ways. It happens as a loss, it happens as a waste. Loss primarily refers to the inability of the system to convey the surpluses of the agriculture to the consumption points. That means before we have reached the consumption centers, there is a loss. And this is because either we're not been able to connect to the market, or we wanted to connect, but we didn't have proper agri-logistics to do so. So this is pre-consumption loss. Now the second waste refers to the consumption, the loss that happens at the consumption level. That means it has reached the consumers, the produce has been monetized at the producer's level, but now the consumers are wasting it in different ways. And that is another kind of waste. Now both essentially result in decomposition, produce a lot of greenhouse gases. And today, if you look at greenhouse gases per se, the highest is produced by China, which stands at 10.7 gigatons equivalent of carbon dioxide. Next is followed by United States that produces 5.7 gigatons. And if you look at India, it is 2.9, and then Russia 2.7. But in between comes the food loss and waste. If you take the food loss and waste of the globe as a country, it stands at 4.7 gigatons, and it is number 3 after China and Russia. Now, why am I talking about the greenhouse gases in this context is that greenhouse gases are produced because of the food loss and waste due to decomposition, and the farmers have invested inputs, including capital, for producing this much. So it's a loss to the farmers. That which could have been converted into money and transferred to farmers, the farmers stand to lose, the economy stands to lose, and more importantly, the ecology stands to lose because the inputs have gone waste without being used. After all, we are in agriculture to produce food, to produce money, to produce employment. Hence, the issue is that all this is happening because we don't have effective market connectivity and we do not have efficient or robust agri-logistics. That is the point that I would like you to remember. Now, when you come to India per se, the food loss and waste, the figures vary. There are different studies that come out with different rate of figures. For example, the Ministry of Food Processing Industries, which commissioned a study through the ICAR CIFET, in the year 2015, CIFET estimated that the loss varied from 4.6% to 15.6%, depending upon the perishability of the commodity. In absolute figure, they found that a high of rupees 93,000 crore was the food wasted, which could have gone as incomes to the farmers. But then another study by NCDC, National Center for Cold Chain Development of our department, in association with Amity International, which studied Uttarakhand, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh, found that food waste in case of 29 fruits and vegetables was as high as 15% to 29%. That means the figures were much higher. And there are many other studies which give you different figures. But the short point is that substantive quantities of what has been produced on the farms is going waste, and that is not just a criminal waste, but it is a ecological waste. Now, this brings us to the short point that if we would like to improve this situation, what do we do to improve our commodity markets? What do we do to supplement the commodity markets through robust agri-logistics? So I would now take you to the dominant commodity markets of our country for the last about 100 years. Now, and that's called as regulated markets, more popularly called as the APMCs, Agriculture Produce Market Committees, because they have been the dominant markets in our country so far. Now, looking into the history of APMCs, this is more than 100 years old history now. The first regulated market in our country came up in 1876, and that was called as a bearer, food grain market, and cotton regulated market. And thereafter, the most important step was taken based on the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Agriculture in 1928, who asked for regulated markets. And when we got independence in 1947 and in 1951, when we had the count, we had about 265 APMCs. The numbers kept on going. But then, thanks to the trigger of the Green Revolution, when more and more surpluses started getting generated, government started investing heavily in APMCs. And by 1981, we had 4,500 approximately APMCs. And then in 2017, we reached a peak of 7,600 APMCs. Of course, they include both principal market yard and the sub-market yards. However, by 2020, there has been a reduction by 1,000 APMCs because a few states like Bihar and Kerala did away with the APMCs. So today we are left with around 6,500 APMCs. Now, the number is important, but it's not all that important. Let's understand the philosophy and the principle of APMC, because that will give you an insight as to what we need to do in the future. When we set up APMCs based on the recommendation of the Royal Commission on Agriculture, and Government of India took it forward in the post-independent history, the premise was that APMCs will allow the buyers, local buyers, to act to the farmers at the APMC mandis. And therefore, the farm produce will find an opportunity to be sold. The purpose was to create short supply chains. We all talk about value chains and supply chains. Under the APMC system, the aim was to build short supply chains so that the farmer producers in the proximity of the farms were able to get their produce and offer it to the local buyers, which then also connected to the next stage terminal markets and agro processors. So this was a good beginning to make. But this was good in the context when India was not producing too much of food. Most of the food was being consumed locally. But then the failure of the APMC system, now looking back, was that they were not able to keep step with the changing demographic situation of the country. India began to urbanize. That means more and more people started going away from the production centers to the urban centers. And then there was demand elsewhere now. It was not just local. In this context, therefore, the APMCs failed to recognize that there was a new demand developing elsewhere, but then they were so restrictive by the act itself that they were preventing the farmers to carry their produce to places where there was demand. So in short, we were not able to connect the production zone to the consumption zone. As you all appreciate, ultimately the price is a function of demand and supply. The fundamentals in the market must operate in a free trade, as Adam Smith was talking about, so that we are able to, through a competitive price discovery, find an equilibrium price on the farmer's produce. But if we have a restrictive practice where farmers cannot go out of the jurisdiction of the notified area, and APMC itself has certain restrictive trade practices on their mandis, obviously the farmers cannot find appropriate price. So that's how the APMCs, which failed to integrate the production zone with the consumption zones, failed the farmers and the country. So in marketing terms, it's called as failure to integrate markets or space. That means Indian market was fragmented into several APMCs, and each APMC was an island by itself, and there was no conveying from the surplus zone to the shortage zones. So this is the story of the APMCs. But then APMCs, if at all, assume that they were efficient and they had been able to do what they are, would that have been sufficient? The point that I would like you to appreciate today is that marketing, all of us keep talking and researching on marketing efficiency. Marketing efficiency is a necessary condition to help the farmers, but it is not a sufficient condition. You may have an efficient system of price discovery, but unless you are able to convey or evacuate the produce from the surplus zones to the demand zones in a safe, secure, and quality manner, such that it is not compromised during the process of transportation and storage, we will not be able to find good price for the farmers. And that brings us to the issue of what is the state of agri-logistics in our country. Now, agri-logistics, which caters to both storage and transportation in principle, need to be looked at once again, as I started saying, in a differentiated manner. We can't just talk about storage and transportation for the non-perishable commodities. They are more important for the perishable commodities. Now, in the non-perishable segment, we have the godowns, dry godowns, and warehouses. In our country, by now, we have around 165 million ton capacity of godowns and storage. That means more or less equal. For example, NRAA studied and said we need about 181 million tons capacity by 2020. We have 165 million tons, almost we are there. But what is more important is whether these storages, are they warehouse compliant? Because the purpose is not just to store the commodity there. The warehouse must enable the farmers to keep them safe and secure and create a credibility in the banking institutions to offer loans against the collateral of the commodities. And the studies show that neither the bankers have that credibility, nor the farmers know about the warehouse receipt system, nor the entire economic system has been able to push this up, though we have been talking about this for donkey's years. So what we really now need to do in terms of storage or warehouse or silos is to ensure that they're well distributed across the country based on district plans for storage. Second, upgrade the quality of the existing storage such that they are recognized as warehouses under the Warehouse Development Regulation Authority. Now let's come to the more important perishables. This is a very sad story in India. When it comes to perishables, whether it is milk or meat or fish or fruits and vegetables, we have not been able to rise up to the occasion. Of course, we did take a very important step in 2005-06. We started making investments to the MIDH, Mission Integrated Development of Horticulture, and we started building cold chains. Unfortunately, our system did not understand that an integrated cold chain is not equivalent to a cold store. An integrated cold chain looks at end-to-end solutions. It first requires a pack house, integrated pack house. Then it requires cold stores. It requires reefer vans or refrigerated vans for transportation. And then, of course, finally, the ripening chambers. Now, if you look at these four important components, pack houses are extremely critical because they help the farmers at the farm gate level or in near proximity to prepare his commodity to go into the cold chain. They have to be sorted out, they have to be cleaned, they have to be graded, pre-cooled. Most important is they have to be preconditioned because you just can't put the commodity that has been harvested into the cold store directly. And therefore, we needed the integrated pack houses. Now, if you look at integrated pack houses, there's a shortage of 99%, as against the estimated about 10,000. We have only around 294. We also have shortage in reefer vans by more than 85%. We have shortage in terms of ripening chambers by more than 91%. What we have sufficient today is only cold stores. Cold stores account for about 35 million ton capacity, which is one of the highest in the world. But then once again, just as we did in justice to the integrated system, within the cold store, we have focused more on storing potatoes and chilies and one or two other commodities. 75% of a cold store actually caters to do these things. And we have failed to look at the differentiated demand based on the diversity of fruits and vegetables, meat, etc. And whatever existing cold stores we have today, 80% is used by horticulture and a balance, a small percentage of pharmaceuticals and meat around 7%. So by and large, horticulture has been using this, but then horticulture has not been able to use it properly because we don't have differentiated integrated cold chain. So we need to look at that stuff. Now, third one, I talked to you about market integration over space, but then what about market integration over time? Because we will not be able to consume everything that we produced within a given season. We need to store it. We need to create longer shelf life, and that calls for processing or agro-processing, which constitutes both non-food and food processing. Within the food processing sector, where do we stand? Food processing helps not just in creating jobs, but it helps in creating the long shelf life for the agriculture produce after it is harvested. Unfortunately, in our country, there too the focus has not been much. As far as food processing is concerned, in 2011-12, it contributed or it generated about rupees 1.41 lakh crore of wealth. In 2017-18, it generated about 1.92 lakh crore, registering a growth rate of about 7.6%. But then if you compare it with what is happening with Western countries and then Asian countries, we are nowhere. We are still at a very nascent stage. If you take the share of food processing industry as a component of the manufacturing value added in our country, we're still at a very, very low level. We're at around 9%. It means that the huge quantum of agriculture produce that our farmers generate is not being utilized properly, either for the consumers or for the economy to create wealth. That is the short point that I would like you to appreciate. So now, if we look at all these things, I analyze for you that the situation is not as good as it should be. But if our aim now is to create wealth for the nation, create incomes for the farmers, and also simultaneously create nutrition for our consumers, and then simultaneously appreciate the needs of our ecology and the society at large, we need absolute new reforms. We need total reforms. We need comprehensive integrated reforms. So now let's move forward and look at what have we done about that. And before I, maybe I'll also talk to you about the commodity exchanges a little later so that you'll be able to appreciate it better. Now let's look at the basket of reforms that the country has recognized and what has happened. Now all of you know that economic liberalization in our country began in the year 1991. It began first with industry delicensing, or remember what's called license and permit Raj. The second generation reforms included the financial sector. Now, as far as agriculture is concerned, which is a primary economic activity, the reforms did not happen immediately in 1991. They started happening sometimes around 2000s. And there have been a number of reforms that have happened thereafter. So let us recount some of those things. The first one, of course, was in 2003, where the shortcoming of the APMCs was recognized. And then we had the Model APMC Act, and then the Model APMC rules in 2007, which were shared with the state governments, which did allow for our private sector to come, but it had its own shortcomings. Then we had the amendment to the Essential Commodities Act, whereby a large number of control orders relating to the food grains as well as the oilseed sector were liberalized. That was in 2004-05. Then we had, more importantly, the ban that had existed on the futures trades since about 40 years was lifted. And we also brought about 131 commodities into the fold of the futures trade, allowed creation and establishment of national commodity exchanges. That was a very major step that India took. And then, of course, there were several other reforms which took baby steps, including making investments in warehouses and making investments in cold stores. But the year 2007-08, where the globe saw the financial crisis thanks to fuel and financial downturn, India also was impacted negatively. And India, in a way, went back on various reforms that had been introduced in the agriculture reform sector, including, once again, doing away with the futures trade, for example, once again, putting back the control orders. So it was a step back in 2007-08. But then in 2011-12, once again, the reform initiatives happened. And the first reform initiative was relating to farmer producers organization. Under the RKVY, pilot projects relating to fruits and vegetables and pulses was initiated. 250 FPOs were aimed at, and the SFAC, the Small Farmers Agribusiness Consortium under the Ministry of Agriculture, came out with very comprehensive policy and process guidelines for the FPOs. And the initiative that began then is now beginning to mature. And then the basket reforms in a more robust manner, in a more systematic manner, have actually begun after 2014. And the first reform, of course, was to address the issues relating to the APMCs, to break that island nature, to break that silo nature, to create market integration over space, and take the first step towards one nation, one market. And that was to integrate them virtually on the electronic national agriculture market platform, or in short called ENAM. So ENAM was the first step which actually tried to create one nation, one market, but because there was a restrictive practice under the APMC Act, it had to be mostly confined to the states. However, some baby steps were taken towards that. So that is the first reform, I would say. And that was followed by the Model APLMC Act, which addressed the shortcomings of the 2003 APMC Act and shared it to the state government. Then we had the 2018 Model Contract Farming Act. In the 2018, we also had the Grameen agriculture markets as aggregation platforms, where the union budget targeted 22,000 number of grams to be set up in this country as aggregation platforms. During the same 2018, where the farmer producer companies were given exemption under the Income Tax Act up to rupees 100 crore turnover per annum. That was another progressive step that was taken. And then, of course, in the year 2019, we moved forward with the reforms. And what culminated in 2020 is what began in 2019. And we have had three very robust ordinances that government has brought out. And one relates to the direct trade. The second one relates to the contract farming as price and quality assurance. And the third one, of course, is to liberalize the control orders relating to food grains and other commodities under the Essential Commodities Act. And all these things, this basket of reforms, wherein the policy environment becomes now free trade oriented, also was supplemented. That second element I was talking about, the agri-logistics. So the Atmanirbhar Bharat, which has announced an investment of rupees 1.65 lakh crore to build backward and forward linkages in the subsectors of agriculture, horticulture, livestock, dairy, fisheries, as also food processing, will actually take these reforms in a more healthy manner. So this is being what has been the reforms. So let me also dwell a little bit about the commodity exchanges, because the commodity markets are as old as civilization. Ever since the first settlement of agriculture began 10,000 years ago, the exchange started happening. But then we had, for many centuries and millennia, we had barter system in economy. We have moved from barter system to spot markets, and from spot markets we have moved to derivatives or futures and forwards. And you know, this barter system existed in our country even as recent as 30 years back. You know, look at that, what started civilization ago existed in our country even a little some decades ago. Notwithstanding that, now when it comes to the derivatives, derivatives have their own advantages. What has happened in our country? Let's look at. Two fundamental requirements of the derivatives is to discover prices for the farmers. Second, most important, is to help the farmers to negotiate the risks that come from the price fluctuations. These are the two important indicators. And we have now allowed 131 commodities. In 2015, that was once again more number of commodities were brought in. Interesting part is, while the onboarding of the commodity exchanges started with agriculture commodities, and the base metals and the bullion and the energy commodities were all brought in subsequent to agriculture commodities. The sad story today is, of the total volume of transaction that happens at the commodity exchanges in India, 88% is that of the non-farm sector. The farm sector accounts only for 12%. That only shows that where the agriculture stands vis-a-vis the derivatives. Now, when it comes to the derivatives, what we need, we need to ensure whether the derivatives in terms of futures trade, is it having a strong correlation with the spot markets. And unless we are able to have a strong correlation between spot market and the futures trade, then most of it will be for wagering, speculation as you call it. The farmers at the spot market will not really benefit. So what we need these futures markets or commodity exchanges to do is to establish those joints between themselves and the spot markets, to build delivery mechanisms, to enable the large traders, manufacturers, agro processors to actually buy the commodities, that means physical deliveries, and they must be also able to promote grading, standardization, quality parameters. Unless our commodity exchanges are taking care of these parameters, the spot markets are not going to benefit. And we want the farmers, we want the spot markets to benefit, because that's where ultimately the price discovery and the physical delivery will happen. What has happened in our country? We expect that if the derivatives are strong and efficient, the farmers who are looking at risk management would be able to short hedge. That means they buy a futures contract before the time of sowing and are guaranteed that this is the price that they're going to get after the harvesting is done. And simultaneously, we expect the agro processors and manufacturers who depend on the agriculture produce for their industry are going to long hedge and going to buy and protect themselves against the likely rise in the prices. And somewhere the expectations of low prices, the expectation of high prices must meet to ensure optimality for both manufacturers and farmers. But that has not happened in our country. First of all, we find that not more than 2,000 farmers are directly participating in the commodity exchanges. Imagine, of the large number of farmers, very small number are participating. Second, where the farmers participate, they do not stand to benefit. The best case is the Gwar gum and Gwar seed case, the scam that happened in Rajasthan with the Rajasthan farmers in 2011-12. While the prices for Gwar seeds increased from rupees 4,200 per quintal in October 2011 to rupees 46,000 by March 2012, and the Gwar gum increased, saw a price increase from about 11,000 per quintal to 96,000 per quintal. The farmers did not get more than rupees 4,000. This entire speculated amount, profits went to the traders. The farmers, poor people, had already sold their Gwar immediately after harvest to the traders, and it was the traders who had been speculating and artificially hiking up the price. And the double whammy for the farmers was, when they wanted to now buy seeds for the next season, by then the prices in the markets had gone up and they had to buy seeds at high prices. So we now need to look at commodity exchanges with certain reforms. And the first reform, according to me, is that we can't have just speculation. We need to have hedging, and hedging means that it has to be not cash transaction, cash settlement based transaction. It has to be commodity delivery based transaction. As long as we have commodity delivery on the contracted date at a future date, then I think we'll be able to check this kind of speculative attitudes or attempts. So I would say that in future, as a price risk management, as a price forecasting mechanism, the derivatives do have a role to play. And as has happened in many of the Western countries where they have been able to play an important role only because their farmers are large in number, farmers are large holders. In India, the farmers being small and marginal do not have the ability to engage with the commodity exchanges, because at the derivatives, we have a minimum threshold of the marketable surplus that can be traded. And most of our farmers, being small and marginal, do not have marketable surplus ratios that they can meet the threshold level. So the answer lies in farmer producers organization. So this takes me to a few thoughts on farmer producers organization before I close my talk. The farmer producers organizations are important because they address a lot of structural weaknesses that farmers as an individual face in our country. A farmer producers organization is defined as any entity that is formed by the producers, for the producers, and is governed by the producers with an aim to pursue one or more of objectives. It is left to the FPO to have any number of objectives. It can be a different kind of legal entity. It can be registered under the Companies Act as a farmer producer company. It can be registered as a society under the Societies Registration Act. It can be registered as a cooperative under the Cooperatives Act of either the Government of India or the state governments. But then they can have different aspects. Let me only tell you that farmers are dispersed. They are as high as 130 million or 13 crore holdings in our country. And then they have to deal with a large number or a fewer number of the downstream players like traders, large number of consumers. And in our country, as you know, consumers are as high as 131 crore. That means 130 million farms are dealing with 131 crore consumers. Now, between this producer and the consumer, where there should be, as far as possible, direct linkage, we have large number of gatekeepers in our country. And these gatekeepers create constrictions for a smooth flow of the commodity from one end to the other end. And these gatekeepers are traders, they could be retailers, wholesalers, they could be manufacturers, they could be of different nature, they could be financiers. So the farmer producers organizations, in an attempt to deal with the consumers, will have to negotiate with the downstream players and create flexibility there. And therefore, farmer producers organizations become important. They become important because the farmers constitute, please understand this, farmers constitute the first step, the foundation, the starting point of a food supply chain. When we want a robust, healthy food supply chain, either domestic or global supply chain, what is the role of the farmers? Today, we know the farmers as measured by the marketing efficiency, nor are they getting competitive price, nor is their share in the consumers to be fair and transparent. So if we want the farmers as the first step in the food supply chain to benefit, then their bargaining power has to increase. And therefore, strengthening of the farmers or the producers is a basic aim of the farmer producers organization. And we know by examples from across the world that if we are able to bring farmer producers organizations together, we will be able to achieve that. And the policy and the process guidelines 2013 of Ministry of Agriculture very clearly lay down 7 principles. Let me allude to a few of those things. The first important is that it is voluntary and open membership. Any farmer is not to be forced, it is to be voluntarily, by whose own volition he becomes a member. He brings about, and that brings about a horizontal cooperation. Second one, it is to be democratically governed. That means by the farmers themselves through a governance structure that is free and that allows democracy. Third, economic equitability. That's very, very important. Otherwise, as you know, in cooperative societies, one strong farmer tends to overtake the entire stuff. Here, what we want is everybody who holds one share, irrespective of the quantum of share, he has got one vote. So economic equitability is very important. Fourth one is, it has to be autonomous. That means there should be no interference by government agencies, as happens to the registrar cooperative societies and the farmer producers cooperatives. The fifth one, there has to be focus on education, training, and information sharing with the members, with the management, with extension officers, with all others concerned with the farmer producers organization. And the sixth one, it has to be that the FPOs themselves must aim at building horizontal and vertical structures at regional level and at international level, state level. And lastly, very important is that they must look beyond financial performance. They must look at building social capital and trust. So these are the 7 basic principles that alone can actually help us to sustain the farmer producers organization. The point of telling you is this, that FPOs are not just meant for farmers. Let's not get away with the feeling at the end of this today's seminar that FPOs are meant for farmers. Yes, they are meant for farmers because we call them a farmer producers organization. But we need to create what is called a win-win-win-win situation. There are 4 players according to me. First is, of course, the farmer. Second one is the consumer. The third one is the manufacturer, agro-processors and traders and business as a whole. And the fifth one is ecology. Now, farmer producers organization, through efficient production system, through efficient marketing system, through efficient planning based on market demand, they will be able to achieve what is called resource use efficiency. They will be able to connect with the markets better. I'm not going to details how each of them benefits, but then we are going to help the farmers win. We are going to help the consumers win. We're going to help the business people win. We're going to help also the ecology win. So the farmer producers organization therefore have the aim to meet the demands and requirements of all these 4 players. Now, what has happened, if you look at the explanation, I'm coming to the close of my talk. For the next 5 minutes, I'll close. Now, European Union, for example, has been one of the first ones to actually start farmer producers organizations. We started sometimes in 2011, 12, I told you. They started their experiment in 1990s. And by now, large number of European countries have very robust farmer producers organizations. A large number of them recognized and some of them are not recognized. But the experience there shows that they have about 254 FPOs for 1 million holdings. So what does that mean for India? We'll come to that. But what they have shown is that because of the FPOs, the farmers have benefited because they have been getting more prices on the produce than what they were getting in the market with reference to the market. The consumers are getting at a cheaper rate than what they were getting otherwise. And more importantly, is that many of the farmers who are members of this have been able to build what is called as consolidated production system. In a consolidated production system, we are able to increase the volume, enhance the quality, and meet the market demands. Only when there is sufficient volume and sufficient quality would the market actually pick up these things in an efficient manner. And these FPOs in Europe, whether it's France and Poland or any other countries there, have been able to achieve these things. And they have actually gone beyond the financial performance and also built what is called as social capital. So I think we can actually learn a lot from those experiences. But then, now how many FPOs do we require? This is the issue. We, in fact, in our Doubling Farmers Income Committee, we did analyze how many do we require. We also suggested a few numbers, of course, for up to 2022. Now, government, as you know, is aiming at 10,000 FPOs. As per the guidelines, and an average, we will have about 15 to 20 farmer interest groups consisting of 15 to 20 members, and such 50 FIGs make one farmer producers organization. That means around 1,000 hectares, 1,000 farmers. If you want to achieve that 254 already achieved in Europe for 1 million households, agriculture holds, we will require 30,000 plus FPOs to achieve that. But if you look at our own guidelines, 1,000 farmers, 1,000 hectares for one FPO, for 141 million hectares, the simple arithmetic tells us we require 1,41,000 number of farmer producers organizations. Okay, can we aim at 70,000? Can we aim at 50,000? Or at least 30,000? Yes, the 10,000 that government has fixed is the first step. If FPOs are answer to the structural weaknesses of our agriculture system, they are a panacea to the farmers' problems and ecological problems, and they are required to create more food processing and generate jobs. Obviously, we can't just limit it to 10,000. It will only remain a pilot then. We need to bring everybody within the cover, under the cover of the FPOs, which only means the point of telling this is all those who are listening to this across the country, and would please keep in mind that you have so much of scope. One generation is not going to be enough for us to build farmer producers organizations, and we have to consistently make that happen. But then we'll be building and destroying. That's what happens many a time. We need to build, we have to sustain them, and that will come from the leadership. Look at Sahyadri, for example, in Nashik, built by a good leader, by good farmers. Today, those grape growers, small and marginal farmers, have beaten Mahindra and Mahindra in the total quantum of exports of grapes in our country. How did this happen? Only because good leadership, sustainable practices, democratic norms. So I think as a university and all the researchers and academics who are sitting and listening today, you have a lot of hypotheses to build as to how to train, how to research, what to advise our farmers to farmer organizations. So there is a lot of work to do. Government has come out with very good policies. Government has come out with very good support system. And we have very knowledgeable people like Mr. Shiv Kumar who have been into this much before what we had done. But what we require today is academics and researchers to go deep into the, find out what exactly ails, why is it that we are not able to be together. Sticking together, sustaining is the most important. So I will start this farmer producers organization. Let me close up by saying that there is a very close integration between commodity markets and farmer producers organization and many other things that government is trying to do. What we should be really doing is to build a healthy agriculture value system. An agriculture value system goes beyond supply chains. In supply chain, you're connecting the farm gate to the markets. But in a value system, we're also connecting reverse. That means the market is continuously feeding information to the farmers such that they decide on the production planning based on the market demand. Today, if we want agriculture to become agriculture business, if we want agriculture to become an agri enterprise, it is obvious that there has to be an organic and two-way diffusion of information on a sustainable basis between the farm gates and the markets within country and outside the country. And that will be possible when you have free market, when you have hassle-free environment, when you have competitive environment, not just one, no monopoly at all. There shall not be any monopoly of even the direct trade. So when only we create this kind of a free and fair environment for the farmers to sell anywhere, sell anytime they want to, that's what their demand has been, I guess would have achieved our aim. So thank you very much, all of you, for giving me so much of time. And I am sure that the great speakers that you have after this, in the form of Mr. Shivkumar and Mr. Chandrasekhar and Professor Sukhpal and others who are all coming, they will give, I'm sure, great details of each of these aspects in greater dimension. So thank you very much, and good day to you all.
Thank you so much, sir. Time for Q&A session, and we'll be taking up there's a bunch of questions from the participants. So I'll be taking them one by one for each of you. And Dr. Dalwai sir, am I audible to you?
Yeah, very much. Please go ahead.
Okay. So there is a question, and that is regarding the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Ordinance. There are a set of questions. So should I speak out all of them for you, or you would like to take them one by one?
As you feel okay.
Okay, so that's like number one is, what are the benefits obtainable by the farmer through this ordinance? The Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Ordinance 2020. Second, what is the authority to impose penalty on person who has established and operated electronic trade and transaction platform for contravention of related provisions of ordinance? I think I should take these two first.
Yeah, the biggest advantage of the direct trade ordinance is it offers the farmers an alternate channel. Today, the farmers depend only on the APMCs. Though we have suggested reforms to the APMCs via the 2017 Model Act, whereby we can have more than one APMC at the same place. It could be under the cooperative sector or the private sector, and therefore there'll be competition. We want an alternate channel to APMCs also. As you know, under the direct trade, the advantage is that the farmers can sell their produce right from the farm gate or any aggregation platform. And then it connects the traders from across the country, because it allows for intrastate and interstate trade. So the biggest advantage is the fragmented markets of the country now get unified. As I told you earlier, the markets of our country have been divided or fragmented among APMCs, between and among states. So now we create one nation, one market. When we have good agri-logistics in terms of storage and transportation, and in due course of time, seamless transition from road transport to rail and water and air, then we'd be able to actually travel faster, deliver the commodities faster. So that is the biggest advantage, and we'll not get into details and all that. And second, what about the system of levying penalty, etc.? Yes, we'll be coming out with rules for this act. So the rules will mention all the details. For example, the act says there is a redressal mechanism at the administrative level under the sub-collector or the assistant commissioner and the collector. So any dispute between the producers and the traders will be sorted out there. Likewise, for the electronic trade platform, the system of levy of penalty in case of deviation of the norms as laid down there would be mentioned in the rules. So it is the rules that will actually give us the operational part of this, and I'm sure you will soon see all those things. But then just be convinced that the farmers have been for long asking, why are you not allowing me to sell wherever I want to whoever I want to? So the direct trade in that sense provides an opportunity for him to sell wherever he wants to. It could be to an agro processor, it could be a wholesaler, it could be an exporter, or he could go to APMC. And to support both direct trade and APMCs, we have aggregation platforms. Aggregation platforms in the form of farmer producers organizations and in the form of GRAMs, Gramin Agriculture Markets. Because the foundation of a new market architecture is to have large number of aggregation platforms within a radius of 5 to 6 kilometers from the farm gate. From there, you can have more of wholesale trade and marketing that can happen. So this is the advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There are two additional questions to it. And the first one again is, the ordinance says that a trader has to necessarily make payment to the farmer in such out of mandi trade area transaction within 3 days of delivery of goods. Is there any restriction in payment of market fee, cess or levy for entry of scheduled farmers' produce from trade area of one state to trade area of another state directly by the farmers?
Yeah, now there is absolutely no restriction. The trade zone has been defined as an area that lies outside of the APMCs, outside of any other place notified as an APMC. For example, under the Model APMC Act, we have said that the jurisdiction of the APMCs shall be confined to their boundary walls. As of today, APMCs have jurisdiction either over a taluk or a district as the case may be. So in a sense, they become market zamindars. That means all the commodities had to go only to their market. But now what we said, whatever the APMC, whether under the cooperative sector or under the private sector, or a notified APMC like a warehouse, a silo, a cold store, each of them will have a circumscribed boundary. If the farmer goes there, their rules apply. All other area outside that is a free zone, is a trade zone, and the trade zone does not recognize any boundary, neither the village boundary, nor the taluk, nor the district, nor the state. National jurisdiction it has. So this direct trade, intra-state and interstate trade means that you can move freely from one place to another, and there is no provision for levy of market fee or cess or anything under this Direct Trade Act. Therefore, any trade that happens outside of these notified markets under the State Marketing Act is a free trade, and that's the biggest strength of this. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. There is a question for you. Is there any chance of linking agribusiness students to FPOs through government policy?
Yeah, see, we can do that. See, now, for example, ICR has a initiative called ARIA, right? Attracting rural youth, right, to agriculture. Then a large number of incubation facilities have been set up. We have incubation facilities run at NORM. Some of the agriculture universities are running. So, and many private incubation centers are coming up. Now under RKVY, we also have allowed funding of the incubation centers. And more importantly, under the RAVE work called as work experience program of 6 months that agriculture universities have, they're supposed to go and experience with different players of agriculture, with farmers, with the agro industries, with officials. So they might as well go and intern with the farmer producers organizations. So there are opportunities, and there is already an institutional mechanism whereby they can actually go and intern. And I'm sure now what can be done is that just as Dr. Agrawal was talking about, promoting industries to go and start picking up students through the placement from the universities, good FPOs can actually start going to the universities because they need professional managers. And under the government scheme, under the FPO guidelines, we have funding for payment also. So professional management is extremely important. The two critical things for any success of FPO is that horizontal cooperation through good understanding. And second one is to run a business enterprise professionally so that vertical integration happens. Farmers will be able to capture higher value only when the FPO is able to integrate vertically and enter into a long range market and try and capture as much value as possible. So I guess the agribusiness students, or people of that background can be good feed for the good FPOs. And I was telling you that we will require in our country at least 30,000 FPOs for a period of time, not just 10,000. Whole field is open now. And how to sustain them, that has to come from research-based, academic-based inputs from academia and also, of course, industry. So it is there.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. There is this Dalwai, sir. There is a question for you. Is there any chance of linking agribusiness students to FPOs through government policy?
Yeah, see, we can do that. See, now, for example, ICR has a initiative called ARIA, right? Attracting rural youth, right, to agriculture. Then a large number of incubation facilities have been set up. We have incubation facilities run at NORM. Some of the agriculture universities are running. So, and many private incubation centers are coming up. Now under RKVY, we also have allowed funding of the incubation centers. And more importantly, under the RAA work experience program of 6 months that agriculture universities have, they're supposed to go and experience with different players of agriculture, with farmers, with the agro industries, with officials. So they might as well go and intern with the farmer producers organizations. So there are opportunities, and there is already an institutional mechanism whereby they can actually go and intern. And I'm sure now what can be done is that just as Dr. Agrawal was talking about, promoting industries to go and start picking up students through the placement from universities, good FPOs can actually start going to the universities because they need professional managers. And under the government scheme, under the FPO guidelines, we have funding for payment also. So professional management is extremely important. The two critical things for any success of FPO is that horizontal cooperation through good understanding. And second one is to run a business enterprise professionally so that vertical integration happens. Farmers will be able to capture higher value only when the FPO is able to integrate vertically and enter into a long range market and try and capture as much value as possible. So I guess the agribusiness students, or people of that background can be good feed for the good FPOs. And I was telling you that we will require in our country at least 30,000 FPOs for a period of time, not just 10,000. Whole field is open now. And how to sustain them, that has to come from research-based, academic-based inputs from academia and also, of course, industry. So it is there.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. There is this interesting question from one of the participants, and that is regarding for you. And to begin with, I would just ask Dr. Dalwai sir first. So the question is, Will India move towards policies that reduce its dependence on imports, a measure to improve their capacity to respond to eventual future crises? I think that's amid the rising COVID challenge that someone is asking for.
Yeah, see, one thing please remember, the meaning of Atmanirbhar is not protectionism, it is self-reliance. Simultaneously, what does it mean? It means that we build such robust supply chains that we are able to actually connect with the world. I think the era of protectionism is over. I talked to you about free trade. We can't have free trade within a limited boundary. We can't have within our district or state or even a country. Yes, we should be self-reliant, particularly in respect of strategic commodities. For example, food is a strategic input requirement. Similarly, in military warfare, there are certain strategic stuff. When it comes to food per se, we must build our strategic protection in terms of both food and nutrition so that we are able to cater to the demographic requirements. And simultaneously, India should aim at becoming the superpower in agriculture. The reason is that we have the strength. We have very high extent of cultivable land, 141 million hectares. Very few nations have this extent. We have 60 types of soils in our country. We've got 20 agroclimatic zones, which means that we can grow a lot of varieties, lot of segments and sub-segments. And if we want our farmers, because all said and done in future also, unlike Western countries, in India with such huge number of people, a lot of people will continue to depend upon agriculture. You can't have a comparable situation like that of USA, UK, where 3 or 4% depend on agriculture. You will have a lot of people continue to depend. And continued dependence on any sector of economy, it means gainful employment. So our agriculture policies must aim at generating gainful employment. And gainful employment will come provided we are able to find good markets. And that markets will come from two policy reforms. One is territorial expansion, that is a direct trade, creating one nation, one market. Second one is functional expansion. Functional expansion means our market is just not food, but it is also for non-food. That means energy sector. It is for non-food processing, pharmaceuticals, for example, nutraceuticals. A lot of industries are there where agriculture can feed the raw materials. It can feed the intermediate goods. So when you have that kind of functional expansion of markets, then we'll find markets for our agriculture. So we will have to have territorially national boundaries and global market. That is a new part, is another important component of the new market architecture. And please remember, you need functional expansion. The growth of agriculture, resilience of agriculture will depend upon the ability to find continuously new markets by generating new demand. Just as an entrepreneur in industry continuously differentiate his products to sell his commodities. Likewise, our farmers have been taught and facilitated to continuously grow new kinds of commodities that will meet the new demands. And I firmly believe that the future economy will depend not just on fossil-based resources. It will depend upon the raw produce generated on the farms. It is very unfortunate that India has not utilized it. Even Malaysia, Thailand, they have 30% of their agricultural, of their manufactured value coming from agriculture. Why is India not processing? Why are we not doing it? Because even today with low level of processing, the number of people engaged in food processing is as high as 5.9 million. And at a very low percentage. Imagine just we start processing so much that we grow, will create more jobs, more industries, more incomes. That is the purpose of agriculture, not just growing and feeding mouths of the people or the cattle. We need to feed the mouths of industries, of the energy sector. So our new policies will be all aiming at expansion of territories, integration over time and space, and of course the market, the horizon of market, the meaning of market has to change. So all your research, I think all agriculture economists,
Yes.
business managers, just see how you can now start looking at giving a new orientation to agriculture. Please stop talking about Annadata. It's not more, yes, he's Annadata, a very respectful word for him. But then I think we need to give him new businesses, treat him as a businessman. Our FPOs should be treated as enterprises. Like in Europe, for example, they have got a threshold. And any producers organization with a turnover of 50 million euros annually is called as a small and medium enterprise. Anything up to 2 million euros is called a micro enterprise. So now you must suggest to us what should be that turnover threshold to treat a particular farmer producers organization as a enterprise so that they become eligible under the MSME segment for assistance. So why MSME means they should also include food processing, non-food processing. I'm just making a loud thinking a little elaborately to tell you that we now need to start looking at agriculture in a different format. It is agribusiness, right from input to output management. Farmer producers organization, because all the time we've been saying that farmers are too small and therefore they can't invite the scales of economy. Otherwise, at the individual farms level, all experiments by agriculture economists show that the productivity is much higher than in a large farm because of personal care. But volume of trade is small because the volume of production is small. That means the farmer is capable of growing. Now we must enable him to convert that into money by bringing them together, mobilizing farmers, aggregating the produce. So he becomes a part of that, as I told in the food supply chain, he becomes a foundation. He is able to leverage the bargaining power at both input management stage and the output management stage. So it's all start looking at it as a business, an enterprise. So all our policies, if you see, right from 2000 onwards, they're all towards that. I did not recount a large number of policies for want of time. For example, export policy of 2019. What does it try to aim at? What do we, when we say that we want 22,000 number of grams, what are we trying to say? Or when you want 10,000 FPOs, what are we trying to say? Or when you want contract farming, what are we trying to say? All these are all towards that new kind of an approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, the government initiatives to turn agriculture.
One question. You have something?
Yes,
yeah,
sir, please.
Continue.
Yeah, please, you can take first question.
Sir, Dalwai sir, there is one question out of my curiosity to both of you, particularly to Dalwai sir. Sir, we also have done some work in this area of FPOs, ENAMs, and that kind of things. And we are living in this town of Amul. So this, we know you concluded in your presentations, many perspectives are there, particularly for researchers, and we have also noted down a few of them. We need to enter in those areas to conduct some research. Yes, you are giving new perspective, maybe new direction, or maybe orientation to agriculture, whole agriculture. But my question is towards FPO kind of things. We have some models like Amul model, well-tested, time-tested model over the years. Maybe the Varna model, maybe the Mahagraves model. At least 8 to 10 models in our country are such models which can be replicated. The problem is why these models are not being replicated. This is one point. And second point, in the background of this is, sir, you concluded that FPOs are a kind of win-win situation. It's not only farmers, but in the supply chain, there are some other stakeholders also. The point is, when we have a holistic model like Amul, which has procurement, processing, marketing, trade, and everything. So this is a good thing to replicate it in other than Amul. Maybe there may be vegetables or the fruits or other kind of things, sir. Why it is not happening? And some people are coming to us. So why it is not? Now Amul is taking some steps. Maybe in the North Gujarat, they have started something there, though it is nothing on concrete level, sir. But I think what you feel, this is very, very important point. If already we have time-tested model, these models, why there is no replication? Whether government, second is whether government can do something, facilitate this thing with some initial assistance to these models, like Amul, sir. Sir, please.
No, I couldn't agree with you more that it is ironical that India, which is home to one of the most successful models of cooperatives built on agriculture value system, involving the poorest sections of the society, the discriminated gender, we fail to learn or replicate those lessons in the non-milk sector. The difference between green revolution and white revolution is this, that green revolution focused upon production and assumed that there is a market. White revolution did not assume that. Two questions that Dr. Kurian always asked was, is there a market for my milk? Second, is there a better rate for my milk? That means you are not talking just about a sale price, but you are talking about a remunerative sale price. And that's how he was able to build an entire value chain, a very efficient value chain, which focused on production and post-production. So I think we had a lot to learn from that. For some reason, we did not do it. One thing was because in the green revolution, we had a natural market initially. It was only after 1980s that the surpluses began to be generated. And another thing was, green revolution was commodity specific. It was more around wheat and paddy. And unfortunately, the procurement became so strong that we did not think that market forces must be strengthened. So there have been some mistakes. However, the good point is that there are many successful projects in India. And many of these things have been driven by visionary leaders, cooperatives in agro-processing. Let us say sugar, for example, oil seeds, even dairy itself. There have been many successful stories. And those cooperative agro-processing centers have actually created business environment and generated employment for a lot of people in the rural sector. So it's not that we have not succeeded, but I think what is now required is to create smaller farmer producers organizations. You know, NDDB or Amul is a very large one. It is a cooperative. So one of the basic principles of farmer producers organization is, on the foundations of farmers interest group, we have a federated farmer producers organization, and we expect that these FPOs will start confederating with other FPOs. They'll build confederations at regional level, state level, even global level. We need to facilitate that. So it is possible, but always two things, that how do we make people to realize that there is a value in it? How do we make people to realize that we shall not do just because money is available? Many of the FPOs have not succeeded in the last 10 years only because they thought that, okay, we'll get a matching grant if we give a certain share capital. As long as that is the be all and end all of it, we cannot move forward. When you ask Sahyadri Vilash Sindhe, he'll always tell you, we did not depend upon government.
Yeah.
As Shivkumarji was saying, they recognize the problems of the farmers, address the problems of the farmers. So likewise here, I think when we form FPOs, an internal champion should be able to diagnose what the problems are, place it before the farmers, and tell them whether they would like to find solutions to that, and take government support only as a bonus. Okay, so I think we can do it. And just as we've done in the most perishable commodity, milk, we can now go to the next perishable sector like fruits and vegetables. Safal, for example, is a fairly good example of what Amul has, diverted from milk to other segments. Our hubcoms in Bangalore, where they have tried to organize retail outlets for the fruits and vegetables by linking with the hinterland of fruits and vegetable growers. So there have been many successes. Now, I think our youngsters, our youth today, I'll tell you that I think there's a time for everything. Today, in our country, the aspirations have grown. Earlier, my generation was looking for jobs in government. Some brighter people like Mr. Kumar look for jobs in the private sector. More risk-taking and more unconventional, right? But today, we have moved from that also to people wanting to become entrepreneurs. Now, government is now trying to create that ease of doing business, removing all these checks and etc., etc. Lesser tariff, easier movement, easier exports, etc. That will facilitate our youngsters to start building enterprises. I think the youth today in 21st century is much more capacitated than what all of us were before them. Their mindset is very different. I think what government has to do or the society has to do is to create that facilitative environment. And I can foresee that all your agriculture graduates, particularly with agribusiness background, imagine there's so much of opportunity today to transform by becoming builders of FPOs, building how to use waste, agriculture waste, how to aggregate agriculture waste, how to convert that into commodities, different kinds of commodities. 780 million tons of agri-produce, means non-consumable agri-produce, what is called residue. 780 million tons. We're just talking about 290 million tons of food grains. I think we have been blind, we have turned a Nelson's eye because of old blinkers. So I guess the new form of education that all of you are imparting will be able to open the eyes of our youngsters to become entrepreneurs, and that they have that opportunity in agriculture. Today's youth wants to be tech savvy. They want to be more doing capital intensive, tech intensive, management oriented jobs. Jobs means building enterprise, and all of that opportunity is there in 21st century. So I think, I'm sure we'll see this, this thing grow up now. We'll see this certainly grow up, okay? And let's all facilitate that through continuous orientation, education, advocacy, and of course, continued reforms at the policy level. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's great, sir. We have learned many things from